Well, hello everybody, how are we doing? Wow, okay, someone needs more coffee. Good morning! For those who try to sleep in this room, you will have a hard time because I try to make this as engaging and interesting as possible. Even though the topic sounds a little boring probably, technical SEO 101 for web developers, I think more of it as a way to help people find your stuff. And I'm pretty sure all of you here are building awesome stuff. Who is a web developer? Show of hands. Okay, pretty much everyone in the room. Those of you who are not raising their hands, what are you? Out of curiosity, yell? Dead. Okay, fine. So that works for me. So my goal is, I am a web developer and have been for a really long time, and I wanted people to use the stuff I built, because what's the point in building it if no one uses it? Another nice aspect is I like to survive. So having something pay my bills is actually quite nice. So the company that I work for and build products for should try to be able to keep the lights on and me in pay. So the option to actually get free traffic onto the thing I build is actually quite appealing, and that is exactly what organic search engines do. They give you people's attention or bring people to your website or web app for free rather than having to pay advertising money. Advertising is an interesting, useful channel, but organic is giving you around 50% if you're doing it right in terms of traffic. So let's talk about what we will talk about today. I know that for many here, SEO is probably one of those terms that feels like not a good thing to say. It's almost a bad word, and I know exactly why, but I want to change that a little bit and explain to you what I think SEO is about and why it is not black magic, and it also is not a bad thing. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how it works from a technology perspective, and we're going to focus a little bit on how Googlebot actually processes a website. And then we look at a few common challenges that keep happening to this day. I'm sad to talk at least about one of them, but here we are. And then I'll give you some more tips and resources to go out and build better stuff that people will be able to find through search engines. All right, so let's start with what is SEO. So when I talked to a bunch of people at the beginning of my career what SEO is, I heard like link building and EAT and PageRank and topicality and quality rater guidelines and all these kind of things, and duplicate contents and canonicals and yada yada. I was like, what? How? What? Whoa? Huh? What? And eventually I realized that most SEOs are basically, well, not most SEOs. There are SEOs that are bullshitting their way through life, let's put it that way very carefully, and that is not a great thing to happen, so I'd rather be able to tell if someone is trying to bullshit me or not. And don't look at them condescendingly, because we are doing that as well. As a developer, I know that there are other developers. I never did that. I did. When someone asks you to explain why something takes longer, and you can't be arsed, you're like, oh, it's algorithmic. Or the algorithm is very complicated, or the complexity is too high right now, so we need to reduce complexity, or it's technical debt, right? All these kind of things that we tell people who we don't have to explain things to. That is pretty much what some SEOs also have to do, because things are complicated. This, by the way, is an infographic that the Swiss public television legitimately used to explain a weather phenomenon. Not exactly helpful, is it? So I'll try to give you a more helpful idea of what search engine optimization, or SEO in short, actually is. So I think SEO stands on 3 pillars. Number 1, I want to make my content so that people get what they want. What do I mean by that? We'll look into that in just a second. But fundamentally, I need to talk in the language of the people who are going to use my thing. If I call something the thermochemical food processor 2000, then people will not necessarily understand that this is a toaster. Call it a toaster if it's a toaster. Call it a duck if it's a duck. So make things very clear. What is the value that I'm bringing to you and whatnot? I've seen that multiple times. As a vegetarian, in certain cities and countries, it's a little trickier to find vegetarian restaurants. You go to a restaurant website. You think it's a restaurant website anyway. You go there, and then they're like, in our artisanal history of making, what did they call it? Of making artifacts of high value, we are focusing on, I'm like, are you a restaurant or not? I don't care about all these fancy words and all blasé kind of thing of going about. I just want to know, can I eat at your place or not? Will you feed me against money? It's a very simple question. And then, how many restaurant websites you go to? What do you want from a restaurant website? Tell me, if you go to a restaurant website, what do you want to know? The menu. What else? Price. What else? Location. And what was the other thing? Opening hours. How many websites are out there that don't do that? It is mind-blowing. They show you like all sorts of pictures, like, ooh, look, we hosted like a wedding dinner. And I'm like, good for you. Are you open today? I don't know, because you don't tell me, right? That is really frustrating. And then I had a designer friend of mine or a UX friend of mine who's just like, oh, I hate it when they have their menu in PDF. I'm like, that's so privileged. I hate it when they don't have a menu. So if you give me a, I don't know, doc, like a Word document with a menu in it, I'm already happy. So that's the state of things. Your content should be polished. Your content should be what people want your content to be. You should give the information of what you're doing, where you are, and all these kind of things, depending a little bit on what you are. If you're a restaurant, where you are is more important than if you are, let's say, a software as a service company, right? So content is one thing. The other thing is strategy. Who are we trying to get to do what? As an example, if I am a, let's say, if I am a company that makes software development kits for AR, then I'm not interested in, well, I guess people running a restaurant or a bakery. They're not my target audience. I might not be interested in beginners to begin with as well, because I might have established industry connections through which I actually want to build partnerships, and then I don't really care if there's beginner content out there. However, if I don't have these, and I actually do care for, let's say, any of you here to build something with my SDK, then I actually do care about you, and you might not know much about AR or my company or the SDK or any of the things that you can do with it. So I want to approach that. If I am targeting you all to build something with my AR SDK, I probably want to show you like a few demos and some code samples and some tutorials and give you maybe like starter projects that you can use to build your applications faster and actually be successful. Whereas if I'm not, if I'm like, for instance, I think HoloLens pretty much targets the professional market, right? They don't care. Then they might actually have to convince business people, which means probably like fancy videos and product demonstrations and business cases. So you want to know who you're trying to talk to and what you want them to do. Another thing would be a company that has a subscription-based service. You want them to subscribe, so you should explain to them, this is what we offer, this is why it's awesome, and these are 3 different ways of how you can actually make a subscription with us. And oh, by the way, there are these other product companies out there that do the exact same thing, but we are better because X, Y, Z. Right? So you want to think a little bit about what are you trying to accomplish through the content that you put out there. And then last but not least, you want to make technologically sound decisions. So you want to build on technology that actually works, and you want to make it as pleasant and nice for the user. You want to make it accessible. You want to make it work pretty much on any device. So whenever I come to your website, I should see what you intended me to see, and it should work, and it should be fast, and it should be accessible. Great. Now let's look at an example. So I'm German, so breakfast is a really important thing for me. And I do happen to eat toast every now and then. So I have a toaster that was passed down upon me by my elders. And that has died. Not my elders, the toaster. Right? The toaster died recently, so I need a new toaster. Great. So I go out on the internet, as I do as a millennial, and I try to find a toaster. And I come up on this website. Okay. So let's start with what is most prominent here, an image. It might be a toaster, but I'm not 100% convinced it is. So let's look at the second biggest thing, which says smart, simple, beautiful, which means nothing. This could be a watch, this could be a boat, this could be a car, this could be a toaster, admittedly, but I don't know. Like smart, simple, beautiful tells me exactly 0, nothing, nada, niente. All right, great. So what else? It will disrupt your breakfast. As I said, breakfast is important for me. I don't want that disrupted, thank you. right? I want a nice breakfast. I don't want it disrupted. And apparently this is about a thermochemical food processor. So what is this? An oven, a microwave, a toaster? I don't know. Having read Best Invention Since Sliced Bread, maybe a play on words with a toaster. I don't know. But so far, I'm not convinced. So what else can I do from here? So this is the starting page. This is the home page. They have a link saying home, okay? They have a link saying our philosophy. I made the mistake of having Latin in school, and I read lots of the philosophers. Great stuff if you're really, really bored and have no internet. However, I don't want to read philosophy. I want to buy a toaster. So not the link I'm going to click on. Then we have the hot bread X10. So this is apparently the hot bread. I don't know what that is. So why would I click on hot bread X10? I don't understand. And then I can join the movement, but I'm really happy with my religion right now. Thank you. So yeah. And the annoying thing about this is a lot of websites, we're all laughing about this. I've built websites like this and landing pages like this in the past because someone in marketing basically went like, woo, we need a website that says like we're smart and simple and beautiful and we put like some imagery in there and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. What is it that we are actually trying to sell here? I don't care, just make it like pop more. Like, have you heard that phrase, like make it pop more? That's probably a thing that most designers have heard in their lives, but anyway. So it doesn't matter what we put here in terms of technology or like theming or colors or images or whatever. This might run on the most beautiful code base ever. It might run on like a CDN. It might be like SSL encrypted. It might be loading in like 0.1 second across the globe on an old Alcatel phone. But none of that matters because I have no idea what this is about. I'm not interested. I'm moving on. But let's make a few changes. And I'm looking here only at like thinking strategically, what are we trying to sell and what are we trying to communicate and what is the person going to this website looking for. And we don't change the technology. We don't even change the design. We just change the content. It's the only thing we're going to change. Bam. I present you Toasty McToasterface, the fastest toaster. This is a website for me looking for a new toaster. I love that. Now, never burn your toast again is a good thing, I would argue. Get your toast faster is a really good thing, I would argue. And we could try Toasty McToasterface. Okay, maybe. But being an engineer, I overanalyze everything, and I'm like, okay, so we need to do some requirements analysis first. But I don't know what the requirements for a good toaster are. But conveniently, this website has me covered because up there is a little link that says how to choose a toaster. So there might be an educational article telling me what I need to look out for, like price, energy consumption, safety, all these kind of things you want to know. Speed as well, very important, like throughput. What's the bandwidth of this toaster? How many toasts can I toast per minute? Like all these kind of things are obviously important. And then I can make a selection of toasters. But where would I find toasters to choose from? Well, conveniently, there's a link saying our toasters. How nice is that? But I actually am really hungry, so I can't be arsed to actually do any of that. So I just click the big red button that says buy a toaster. And there we go. My problem is solved. Technology hasn't changed. Design hasn't changed. Content has. Content is tricky to get right. I hate it, and that's exactly why I pay experts to make content that is useful and good. There's technical writers, there's copywriters, there's plenty of people who you can actually give money to get good content. They will ask you a bunch of questions if they are doing their work correctly, but it will help you be like this instead of this. No, bad. Yes, good, excellent. However, we don't really have like much influence on the content usually. But the annoying thing is that pretty much without good content, all our technical efforts are chocolate ice cream emoji, to not say shit. All right, but let's talk about technology, because we are here at a technical event. So you might have had situations where you had SEOs come to you being very, very concerned when that is what the source code of your web app looks like. And you probably already know that a lot of websites look like that these days before JavaScript has been executed. And SEOs often believe that is a problem, but that is not true. And I'll tell you why in a second. So how does a search engine work? If you think about it, what we were doing is A search engine is kind of an API, or well, it uses your website as kind of an API to ingest data and actually do something with that data. How does it do that? Well, the first thing is it needs to know a bunch of URLs where content might be, and this content might be interesting. So let's say like someone in your company has submitted your website for indexing, so there is a URL from your website or your web app in the crawl queue, so we have a URL at this point. Eventually that gets picked up by the crawler. What's the crawler? It's fundamentally it's curl on or wget on steroids. So it does nothing else than make an HTTP request, download stuff, and also all the assets, and also it follows the robots.txt protocol or the robots exclusion protocol. That's a topic of its own. But fundamentally, it just downloads stuff from your web server, and then it passes it on to processing. So now we get the HTML in a classical website with lots of things in the initial HTML. That's pretty much where that part ends, and we can now look at like, what language is this? What is this? Is this about toasters or cats or boats or watches? And all these kind of things happen here. We also figure out if this is an error page or if it's like having lots of images, so we might want to pass these on to image indexing. If it has links to other pages, that's also a good opportunity to actually pass back the links into the crawl queue so that they can be crawled next. That's why it's called a crawler. Like you start with a URL, that URL has some HTML on it that contains more URLs, and then you basically like go from one URL that you find to the next until you've pretty much hopefully discovered most of the web. That's why it's called a crawler. In the processing stage, we are trying to identify what is this about. Is this good quality? Is this bad quality? Is this spam? Is this adult content? What language is this in? And so on and so forth. As part of this processing, we don't only extract URLs for the crawl queue, we also do what we call rendering. So we have a little queue that is actually pretty short and quick. In the meantime, on the queue is 5 seconds for websites. And then we basically run it in a headless Chromium if you want to. We call that the web rendering service, but fundamentally what happens there, the most important part, is we execute the JavaScript and then fetch additional resources through the crawler, yada, yada, yada. So if your website works as intended, even if it's using a client-side rendered JavaScript framework, you'd be fine, because here that is where we actually see all that content and pass it back into processing, and then processing picks up your content there. That's it. Once we've processed it and found it good, or like useful enough to be in the index, we put it in the index. Fundamentally, we store it in a huge database. And then when it's in the index, it's kind of, that's where you want to be. So now it can potentially show up for queries. I'm not talking about ranking much, because that's something that you don't have influence over, and actually no one has influence over, even though a few SEOs will tell you that they do. No, they don't. They might have some techniques that work in the short term and then will actually destroy your website in the long term, so good job. But fundamentally, you want your website and all the URLs that belong to your website in the index, or at least like the ones that you really care about should be in the index, because that's what potentially can show up in search results if it's useful for a certain query. If I have a website that is about a cafe in Nantes and I'm searching for cafes in Zurich, then that website showing up for the query does not make sense. So like that's one thing that ranking does amongst a lot of other things. All right. The problem here is all of this, or the challenge rather than a problem, the challenge here is all of this is an automated process. It's basically a robot doing stuff. This is code doing things. If you've ever written code, you know that it does exactly what you tell it to and not what you want necessarily. If in like the stars align, both of that are the same, but not necessarily. So things can go wrong in this pipeline, in the set of processes. But the nice thing is, at least our crawler and our renderer are making an effort to make this as transparent and easy as possible for you. For instance, Googlebot used to actually be limited to a very old version of Chrome when rendering. Now it actually is evergreen, which means as of today, for instance, we are, oops, did I skip that slide? I don't know. At this moment, for instance, we're Chrome 106, and I think that is the latest stable desktop Chrome that you can get at the moment. Whenever that updates, within a few weeks after the update, we will also update on the WRS. You can share this link, goo.gle/evergreen-googlebot, with your SEOs who still don't know that that is the case. There's still a few people who are like, oh, I don't know. It's a really old version. No, it is not. Also, our testing tools are using exactly the same version, so whatever is in production is also in our testing tools. And as I said, the Chromium version in the web rendering service right now is 106. Long story short, this is fine. If you have an SEO telling you it is not, that is not a good thing to hear from an SEO, because they might not have understood what happened in the last 4 to 6 years. So that's not good. But there are things that can go wrong. And one of the pet peeves of mine is that pretty much every framework tutorial skips over 2 important and simple things. One is the title, the other is the meta description. I don't know why. Because if you think about it, if I'm searching for, let's say, cupcake recipes, and I see search results like this, that is not helpful. I don't care for your blog. I want a specific recipe. I actually, at this point, don't know which one is a cupcake recipe. And if I click on the first one and it's apple pie, that's pretty bad. So this is not necessarily directly a ranking issue, but this is a problem of user choice. So now I'm seeing search results, so ranking has already happened. But I'm not enticed to click any of them because they look pretty shite. So I might actually scroll on and click on something that says, you know, cupcake recipe. So you don't want that. You actually want to make sure that you do have titles that are descriptive for the content that is displayed on the specific view or page. So that's one thing that a lot of people are overlooking and then wondering why their search performance is not very great. You can do that in React using, for instance, React Helmet, and then using some descriptive, useful properties that you get from the backend, for instance. Same goes for Angular, where there's like the title and meta services, and you can do that with Vue Meta in Vue as well. If you want to learn more about these kind of problems, we have a YouTube series on our Google Search Central channel for this specifically. Another bunch of things can go wrong. Here, for instance, is me trying to fly a parachute and or paraglider, and yeah, it didn't go so well, did it? And sometimes it's small things that have fatal consequences. This was not fatal, but the thing was I held my arms wrong. And the guy on the right is actually yelling in his like walkie-talkie for me to hold my arms differently. The unfortunate thing is he basically says, hold your arms differently, and I didn't know how. So yeah, this process that I was describing earlier, how Googlebot ingests your website and actually deals with your website, can go wrong in multiple places, and sometimes it's the small things. So we're going to talk about a few things that can happen. One of the things is that we are seeing some of your pages, but a bunch of your pages are not discovered. There's a tool called Google Search Console that will tell you, we've seen this, but we haven't actually discovered this URL yet. We don't know that it is there. So you will see like, oh, there's a bunch of URLs missing that I care about. Why is that? Usually it happens because you're linking to them wrong. And this being 2022, I cannot believe that I still see this on a weekly basis, people getting this wrong. But here we are, so okay. This is a link. Okay? So you can click on it, you can use your mouse or keyboard or assistive technology, and it takes you to a different URL with different content. So far, so good. The URL is marked in the href attribute. So that is a URL that once I add like the port and the protocol and the host and everything, this is a resolvable URL that I can make an HTTP request to. That's a good link as far as Googlebot is concerned. Still fine. That's a fancier link. It now has some JavaScript added to it to make it app-like, right? So probably this go-to function does something to interrupt the browser navigation and actually show like a nice transition or something. I don't know. But fundamentally, this is still fine because it still has an href, and the href still points to a resolvable URL that I can make an HTTP request to. But then people start to be clever. It is a link, HTML-wise speaking, good job, but it doesn't go anywhere. So as far as Googlebot is concerned, yeah, Googlebot doesn't click on stuff. Why would it? It's looking for URLs to make HTTP requests to. This is not having a URL to go to, so bad. And then people are like, well, this has a URL. True, but the fragment and whatever comes after the fragment basically means we are on the same page and we will stay on the same page. So that means this link is not going to be followed either. Clever? Still not a URL that I can make an HTTP request to, so no, again, not a good thing. That's not even a link. If it does something on the current page, like show additional information or perform an action, like, oh, I want to upload this thing here, sure, that should be a button. If it takes you to different content, don't make it a button, make it a link. You can make it look like a button with CSS if you want to, but don't do that. No, that's not even an interactive element. Why? Why do you hate yourself? Is it that? Like, what is happening here? So no, stick to these two and you will be fine. Which brings me to another thing. I said something about fragments there. Fragments are meant to be taking you to a part of the content that is already in the page. So if you have a really long article, let's say like about the history of jam, then you might jump into like the 2000s or something, and then you actually get to a specific piece of the very long article. So for Googlebot, that doesn't really matter, because we are indexing the page as a whole. So any of the fragment navigation, we don't really care. So developers at the beginning of single-page application development in the early 2010s-ish had to work around issues and lack of APIs for doing this properly, so we used fragments. We felt bad about that, so whenever like a fragment changed, you get a JavaScript event, you can then load different content. That's a hack. So we thought, like, at least we can tell people that it's a hack by making it look like weirdly. So in that case, we came up with a hash bang. So that's like the hash key and then the exclamation mark. So we're like, we kind of tell you that we're hacking this URL here. Still not great. And actually, this works in all browsers, but it doesn't work very well with search engines. It sometimes works, but most of the time it might not. So be steering clear of that. But Martin, I hear you ask, what else am I supposed to do if I can't use the hash change event? Well, there's a thing called a history API. It is a little more tedious to actually work with that, and now we get like transition APIs and stuff, or navigation API, I think it's called. So that is a nicer future option for at least Google search. I'm not sure about the other search engines, but actually this works in pretty much all browsers except Opera Mini, and for them you just get like the link works as a link, so they get like a less nice transition, but it still works for them. So there's no reason not to use the history API. Then there's also this problem in Search Console that it says, like, we discovered it, so we found that URL, but we didn't index it. That can have multiple reasons. One is the content is actually crap, and we just think it's crap. But it doesn't have to be just that. It can also just be something about the crawl budget. So we've discovered it, but actually haven't gotten around to download and look at it yet. OK, so then how do you decide when to do that? Well, there's two things. There's the crawl rate, and there's also the crawl demand. So that's basically the answers to the question, how often can we actually crawl your pages, and how often do we want to, or should we? To give you an example with the crawl rate, if your server is basically saying, like, I'm good and responds really quickly, we're like, woo, nice, maybe we can make more requests at the same time and get more pages at the same time from your website. But then eventually your website actually starts becoming slow. So normally, that would be a telltale sign for us that we are overwhelming your server, so we want to probably drop the crawl rate a little bit. Here, at this case, we had 350 requests per second. If your server is overwhelmed with that because it's a Raspberry Pi running under your desk or something, fine. That's not a problem. We're just going to be a little slower, which also means if you have 1 million URLs, this is going to take us a while to actually see all these 1 million URLs because we can't make as many requests per second as you might want us to. The other alternative is if you're responding reasonably fast, but you give us like a 402, 405, 504, 503, 502, 501, then we are also like, ooh, we caused a server-side issue, so maybe we actually overwhelmed the server too much, so we should also cut back a little bit on crawl rate. So you want to take a look at your server logs and see if you have any server-side errors, like 5xx HTTP errors, because that usually makes Google back off a little bit. But this is only a problem if you are a really large website with multiple millions of URLs. We're talking tens of millions of URLs. For small websites, this doesn't really occur. This is not really a problem. The other thing is crawl demand. So if it's a website about Halloween coming up soon, then probably more people want to see it soon, so we want to get up-to-date information from all your websites regarding Halloween, so that might make sense for us to crawl it a little more often. The other thing is like news websites. News websites keep changing every couple of minutes maybe, and there's like new stories developing, so we want to keep those up to date as well. If you have a website with a story of jam, I'm not sure how frequently things happen in the jam world, but basically I guess if we are crawling like once a year, we'll probably catch all the updates. So freshness of the page makes also sense for us to take into account. Like if it doesn't change, then why would we re-download it again and again and again? It doesn't make sense for us. If you want to learn more about this crawl budget problem, and again, this affects people with tens of millions of URLs on their website, then go to goo.gle/crawl-budget. Another thing that you might hear is people get very, very nervous when there's duplicate content. Usually it isn't actually much of a problem, because if you have multiple URLs pointing to the same content, so let's say like here we have top dog, which is the dog of the day or something, and that happens to be the dog named Laika, then the profile page of Laika, which is under dog Laika, dog/dog/Laika, is actually the same content as top dog. The problem with that is that if you are searching for Laika and you find top dog and it's like a few days ago, then it actually might show you a different dog, so that's not a great experience either. So how can you fix that? And Google at this point doesn't know which of the two URLs, because we're not going to put both of them in the database. Why? It's the same content, right? So we'll be like, okay, so both of these URLs point to the same content, so we eeny, meeny, miny, mo, that's the one that goes into the index. Not great, but you can actually do something to avoid this deduplication to go the wrong way. Instead of eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you can tell us which of the two we should choose for indexing. So you can say like, all right, today it's Laika is the top dog, but we don't know how it's going to be looking like tomorrow. So we would rather have you index Laika rather than the top dog URL, because the top dog URL isn't very useful for search results. Again, strategy here. If you get that wrong, you can actually accidentally nuke a bunch of your pages from the index. That's not great. But also, we are trying to help you with that one by sometimes ignoring it. So we are taking this as a signal, like you are asking us to do that, but we might not follow that wish. So you'll see how that goes. But generally, if you give us reliable canonicals like this, we would usually follow them as well. But we might not. Another thing is if you want something out of the index, if you're like, ooh, I don't want this to show up, a lot of people then turn to robots.txt, but that's not what robots.txt is for. Robots.txt is for steering the crawling in the right direction. So for instance, I don't want anything in private to have like, random HTTP crawls being wasted. Like Googlebot does not need to ever request anything under private, because I don't want it in the search results, and I'd rather have it spend its HTTP requests elsewhere, maybe on the shop or something. So then I can tell in robots.txt that Googlebot is not allowed to actually make HTTP requests there. The problem here is things might still show up in search results. And that's because if something links to it, let's say like I have a website that has /private/high school photo of Martin Splitt.jpg, and I really don't want that to show up in search results. But someone else has a website, like I could do like the robots.txt shown there, but then someone else links to it. Then Googlebot finds that other website linking to it and goes like, ooh, we're going to crawl that. And then the crawler goes, no, I'm actually not going to crawl it. But assuming from the context, because on the other website it says like, look at this ridiculous high school picture from Martin Splitt. So we don't know if it really is a good high school picture of Martin Splitt, but someone else says it is, so we might show it if nothing better is around. So usually if there's something better that we can find, then we would show that and actually not include this in the index. But if this is the only piece of information for that query, it might actually still show up in search results. And this is where it becomes interesting. So robots.txt prevent crawling, but not indexing. For indexing, you would have to set an HTTP header or put a meta tag in the HTML to actually prevent us from indexing it. The problem there is if there's an HTTP header in the response, or if there's a meta tag in the HTML response, we only see that when we can crawl it, right? We need to make an HTTP request to receive the HTTP response. So if you're roboting it away and say, like, do not crawl this, then we're not seeing these things. So you want to use one or the other, not both, because actually it doesn't have the effect you would intend it to have. Then we have like soft errors, and that happens specifically in client-side rendered single-page apps. You go to a URL that doesn't exist, and then you see an error message. So as a developer, I'm like, check, I'm done here, this is fine. However, the problem here is, because it is a single-page application, the easiest way to set up the server is to always respond with the index HTML, and then the JavaScript deals with the error. The problem with that is that the server says, I've got content for you. When Googlebot does this, it's not great, because it actually relies on the HTTP status to tell you if this is content or if this does not exist in terms of content. So normally we catch this in what we call the soft 404 detection, but sometimes we don't, and then you get search results like this. So this clearly, an error occurred, should not have been shown in search results. How did it happen? Exactly like that. There was a 200, okay, we're like, all right, this is content. Maybe the content looked to us like it's not an error page, and then that's why we put it into the search results. To fix that, what you can do is, whenever you're fetching your API data, basically. In this case, we are fetching data about dogs, and we find out, oh, the dog doesn't exist. We can set up our server for one specific URL to always respond with a 404. So now Googlebot will follow that redirect to a 404 and go like, so this page points us here, this page doesn't exist, so both of these pages don't exist. And then that's it. The alternative is to hold onto a meta name robot tag somewhere in your HTML and set that to no index. That also works. However, you want to be careful not to have a no index in your initial HTML and then remove that, because what happens then is not what you intended. What happens, in fact, is actually in processing, we look at the HTML, we see a no index, and we stop the pipeline, which means the JavaScript never runs. Another thing is that Googlebot does not persist data. So if you are looking for things like session APIs, or cookies, or session storage, IndexedDB, all these kind of things, we don't have them available. The same is true for a bunch of other APIs, such as like user permissions, for instance, location, or camera, or microphone. We decline those. WebSockets don't quite work. So if you are interested in all the limitations that we have for various reasons, including security and others, you definitely want to check out the Search.js troubleshooter that we put together to help you find out why Googlebot doesn't do or doesn't see what you intended to see. Also, annoyingly, not all crawlers support JavaScript. If you're working with Open Graph on things like Facebook and other social networks, Twitter as well, and I don't know what else, you might find that actually they don't really render JavaScript. That is unfortunately not the case. But some crawlers do. Most of the major search engines do these days. Which gives me a tip, or lets me give you a tip. If you want to avoid that problem, then you want to build something like server-side rendered, and you can use hydration if you want all the flexibility of a client-side rendered app, or you can pre-render it on deployment if the content only changes at very well-defined points in time, or you can actually use something such as pre-rendering through a proxy that only bots see the pre-rendered content, and everyone else gets the client-side version. Unfortunately, that usually incurs additional problems, so I'd rather not do that. We called it, at some point, we called it dynamic rendering. It's a bad idea. Don't do that. So let's wrap it up. You have testing tools that are using the latest, what we have in production for the rendering and the Googlebot infrastructure. Those are the mobile-friendly test and the Search Console. The mobile-friendly test lets you pretty much test any URL, and you get the rendered HTML that we would be using for indexing. Search Console only works on domains that you actually own, so you want to make sure that you talk to your SEOs or marketing department to set that up correctly. Consider server-side rendering or pre-rendering, depending on your use case. If it's a marketing blog, then the only moment the content changes is if someone puts up a new blog post or edits a blog post. So you can basically pre-render everything in static HTML, and then everything is a lot easier from a security perspective, from a performance perspective, trust me. If that doesn't work and your content changes more frequently or more user-drivenly, then you actually want to consider server-side rendering instead. Make sure that your page can be understood and accessed by crawlers properly. And if you want more resources, we have fantastic guides on our documentation website. You can watch more videos if you're more interested in video content. You can ask us through our help forums. And if you have JavaScript-specific problems, you can also ask the mailing list for JavaScript sites. Also, generally, our documentation is on developers.google.com/search, has plenty of information and funny, nice little pictures and videos, so definitely check that out. Also, we are on Twitter at Google Search C. With that, I'd like to say thank you so, so much for listening. I do wish you a fantastic rest of the day and hope to see you soon again. Build cool shit on the web.